Okay, cool. So the recording has started. Thank you to everyone who's joined us today. Just a reminder, this is a Teams meeting, so when you're joining, just keep your mics and you can keep your cameras on. That's okay to engage, but just your mics off for now whilst we're kicking off the session. You'll see here on my screen today, I have Victor Olet, who I'll do a brief introduction to shortly. So thank you for tuning into our Mums Returning to Tech program. Our first session today will be working with Python in VS Code and GitHub. So I've got Victor Olet here with me, who's going to go through that with you shortly for the next 45 to 50 minutes with some time for questions at the end. So do keep sending us your questions through in the comment section and we'll try and answer as many as possible. So Victor, just a bit of big background on him. He is a PhD student at Curtin University working in the renewable energy sector, researching the generation of liquid biofuel to replace fossil fuels-derived transport fuels. He enjoys the sciences of chemistry and biology and also their enhancement through computational techniques. God, that was a tongue tire. Sorry if I said that wrong. So Victor is also passionate about education and wants to support the current and next generations by sharing their knowledge and excitement with students through interesting, another word that I'm going to stumble on, pedagogies, enhanced learning experiences, and great tech tips that give learners a leg up. And also just to mention, Victor is joining us from Perth today. So it's quite early there. So thank you so much, Victor, for getting up early and joining in for this live stream. So regardless of all of my trip ups with those amazing words that Victor used for his introduction, which I'm sure Renee will correct me on shortly, without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Victor. So Victor, over to you and thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you, Sarah, for the intro. It's great for me to be here. Thanks, Renee, also for the opportunity. Yeah, it's like 7 a.m. now, but as I was mentioning earlier, like I really like having morning sessions because it's just works very well for my schedule. I guess we'll just go ahead and get started. I'll be taking you through VS Code, and so especially how it interacts with various tools just to help us with our own development cycle. So the first thing we're going to look at is working with VS Code in general, setting it up, navigating VS Code, and then we're going to look at how we actually code using Python on VS Code, and there are various tools that VS Code offers natively and more via extension that just make that process a whole lot easier. And then we'll be integrating VS Code with GitHub, and through this way we will have a little demo where we fork and clone from a GitHub repository to our local VS Code if you have it installed, and then make some changes and then push that to GitHub. So it'll be quite a full workflow in that sense. So hopefully at the end of the session we'll be familiar with VS Code, a bit familiar with working with Python, and also familiar with integrating VS Code with GitHub. So in a bit more detail, VS Code it's not it's fairly new, but it's a popular tool which we'll look into a bit later. It makes the development cycle quite easy because a lot of the tools are integrated that in the past used to be separate and now quite integrated into one piece of software. So that really enhances the development process, and that's why I would like to take the time to look into it. And it's not just for, I must say, it's not just for only the development cycle. Generally, if you're working with text and as a general text editor, VS Code is very, very useful, which sort of fits my case as well. Python, we'll look a bit into Python, an easy to learn language, very popular as well in a development context, also in a science context. And we will touch on Python briefly. I believe Renee will cover Python in a bit more detail in the upcoming session when we'll be using it to deploy. She'll be showing how to deploy a web server. There's also some pre-work material, which I think is a cloud skills session. I have a link to that on a later slide, which you can use to familiarize yourself with Python a bit more. And lastly, GitHub and also Git. There are version control tools that let us store our code and keep track of changes made, and also collaborate with other people. And that is something we'll explore in our later task. Okay, so VS Code. It's essentially an integrated development environment, and the idea with the terminology is that, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of the dev tools are been put in a particular piece of software. So if you think from a particular dev side of view, there's the idea, for example, of debugging, compilers, and many other features have the rise of IDEs and their popularity is generally because they put all these tools together. In the past, they generally used to be quite separate, and so maybe you had to switch workflow from one software to another piece of software, maybe from file navigation, and then maybe to open your particular text file is another software. But now you can have it all in one piece of software, which makes it quite handy for use. And it's not just my own opinion. This is on the right is actually a graph. It's taken from Stack Overflow from the survey in last year's survey, and VS Code has a very large portion of as an IDE of choice for amongst many developers. This data in particular is for those who are learning to code. Those who have already learned to code who are termed professionals, VS Code also still holds a large majority as the IDE of choice, and so it's quite the data does back us looking to promote VS Code as the IDE of choice. And I should also say personally, I'm finding that and I'm not really coming from a software side of things. It's more I'm more of a, as Sarah mentioned, I'm doing my PhD in chemistry and computational chemistry, and even for me, I'm finding that at this point, 80% of my workflow is on VS Code already. And it's soon to be 90 because just recently someone taught me how to do note taking on VS Code with another piece of software that integrates very well with VS Code. So I'm looking to try that, and I think it'll just end up being soon all my workflow will be on VS Code because it's just so well integrated with the various pieces of software within various features within, and some of those features I mentioned earlier, but just to highlight again, so there's the file navigation. These are just features which I like, and features which I think general users like, is the idea of file navigation, having a terminal and a text editor in one file. So this is just from this image here. You can see that this is a PowerShell, which is a with common Windows terminal that you can use to put in commands. And there are people who actually who still prefer using, who rather than use ID, they still like using the terminal and just navigating the file explorer via the native OS file explorer. But if VS Code has, for example, here you can see just from this screenshot, you can see there's a file explorer, which is within the software. I've opened two files. This is a text file, another file here, which is also a text file, just a different extension. And then we have the terminal at the bottom. And so you have this view where you can have all these at once. You can see them at once. I mean, so straight off the bat, this is one of the things I really appreciate about VS Code as an IDE. You can get this in other IDEs as well. But for me, I find it just flows, this kind of view just integrates things very, very well. Another aspect is remote connection. And so that's something which is quite useful, especially when you have to connect to a server or something else, because you don't always do your development on your local machine. And so it makes that process quite easy. Another thing which is more like icing on the cake is the shortcuts and extensions. VS Code has quite a few shortcuts, some of which we'll explore very shortly. And also, it allows, part of it is open source. I think it's all open source actually, and that allows other developers to develop extensions that just enhance the VS Code experience. Generally, also, which is a great feature, is it's continuous development. So I personally have the stable VS Code, and then there's the insider VS Code. I have both, and the insider VS Code, I think that it's every couple. You can opt for nightly builds. You don't have to do that, but it just goes to show you that they really put in a lot of effort to development. And so I think that's one of the things that I really like about VS Code as an IDE. So installing VS Code, you can if you plan to install VS Code on your local machine, you can just head to the website, and you have the option of installing via Windows, Mac, or a Unix system, depending on what you have. Generally, when you're installing, which it's normally already ticked, but you just need to make sure it's added to path. That way, it connects very well with your other system variables. And also, perhaps I can just show quick. I have a quick demo which I made of this. That means I have to just navigate how to share this off. So let me see. If it'll work through. Sorry, is this coming through?
No, we're still on your slides.
Yeah. Okay.
Have you shared your slides specifically or a specific?
No, I actually
window?
haven't. Yeah, I see.
Interesting.
At this point, I'll just share my whole entire screen. It's just easier. I just wanted to show very quickly. Oh, can you see this now? I'm essentially playing. It's showing Python.
Yeah, I see the Python logo on the top left corner. 3.9. Yeah.
Yep. Okay, that's what I wanted to show. So I've just pre-recorded this. Okay, so this is, for example, on Windows. What I just wanted to show is once you download it. Oh, so this is Python. I just moved to VS Code. So on the website here, you can. Okay, so this is the website. You can choose the right software you want. I got Windows, and so it's downloading. I just wanted to highlight one aspect after it finishes downloading. This is the point. One of the features I found useful is generally it's add to path, so that one's by default. But sometimes, if you wish, you can have an icon. Sometimes the open with code adds VS Code to your context menu. So if you right click, it normally gives you an option to open with VS Code. So sometimes if you want to open a file very quickly, it's very useful to have these two buttons checked as well. So just wanted to show that, something I recorded earlier and I thought is useful to know. I will go ahead back on this slide. Is this back on the slide now, Renee?
Yes, we're back on installing VS Code.
Okay, I think I got it now. Okay. Yep. So that was just a quick way if you're installing it locally, but you don't have to install VS Code locally to use it. There's various other ways you can use VS Code. So one is from GitHub. So if you have a GitHub repository, there's this nifty way where you can just launch VS Code by changing the URL from I will show it a bit later, from a .com to a .dev. Then you that way it can create a VS Code instance that is based on that particular repository. So just make a change on that repository without necessarily spinning up VS Code from your local machine. This is good for front-end development. However, it cannot run Python. So for our use case, it would, because we want to run some Python code, it may be a bit. It may not be the best option, but it's something to keep in mind if you want to make a quick change to a repository. This is an option. Also, there's a shortcut of just pressing which is the just showing there. You can just press the full stop button on that particular when you're in that particular repository, and it'll activate it. Another way is through typing in vscode.dev on your URL bar, and this one is not limited to GitHub. So when you type that in, it actually it opens VS Code in the browser, and it can access the files you have on your local machine. So again, quite useful in the sense that you don't have to have it installed. However, in our case, if you're trying to run Python directly, also that it doesn't support that unless you're running it via a Jupyter Notebook server. And lastly, which I think is the more recent feature, is using code spaces. And code spaces is just like is like essentially running VS Code as usual, but it runs on the browser, and it uses the cloud compute resources to run. So this one you can run Python. You just need to set up a Python and like a particular environment. So I just took a screenshot, for example. This is from the code spaces startup page. You can see if you want to set up a Jupyter notebook, you can have a template, and it sets you up with the appropriate amount of cores and RAM, and also with the whatever files you need for your Jupyter notebook. And so if you don't have VS Code installed locally, you can use the code spaces to continue the rest of the session. Renee, do you know much about the pricing on the code spaces? Like, I think there's I know for students, I think they have an offering as well.
Yeah,
So I'm not
for
sure how it works.
students, there is lots of free offering, but for professionals, you still get a decent number of free hours a month. So students get like twice as much as that, but like it's not bad to just use the free tier as a professional at the moment.
Yeah, so it's something we can actually use for this session and going forward as well. Okay. Also, I just want to show, hopefully this time I'll be a bit better. This should be showing my a video, because I can see it sharing the screen. This was just a demonstration of using VS Code.dev. So I just keyed that in on the browser, and when I did that, it essentially starts a VS Code instance, and from there you can navigate in a particular whatever folder you want from your local machine. So in that case, I just found a particular folder which already has it's actually already in my workspace, and through that I can able to access the files that I had, and it's essentially just like VS Code, the support I have natively as well. So it's quite a useful tool to have, especially when you're on the go, because you're not always on your machine. As for me as well, sometimes I have to log in from different machines, but the good thing also, sometimes I have OneDrive, which can also help me access different files from different locations. But this is just a demonstration of the VS Code.dev. Code spaces as well is there. I put a link if you want to explore it further as well. So I will go back to here. So that concludes the various ways we can access VS Code. I also just wanted to show some various tips and features. I think this is one of the key things with VS Code. I find that I really, really like is there's various tools. There's ways of getting things done far much quicker, and you sort of learn as you go. And I just wanted to show some of these things to apps it may also be of benefit to you. And I'll just show this fairly quickly. I think it's easier to show via demo as opposed to talking through the slide. This one. Let's see. Okay, I'll just walk through what I'm doing here. So one of the things, this is a typical VS Code view. We have our file navigation system, the text editors window, and then you have the terminal here at the bottom. So sometimes, especially if you have screen real estate, like if screen real estate is an issue, there's an option of Control J. What did I do? Okay. So I think the first thing I did was Control J is just to toggle the terminal on or off. So for example, if you want the terminal and you're not typing a command, it will be useful. But sometimes you're not using the terminal. You can type in Control J to just toggle the terminal off. In that case, Control B would be to toggle the navigation on or off. So if you want to remove the navigation and have a bit more real estate for whatever files you're sharing, that would be useful as well. I'm just trying to see where I did it. Okay, I think I did it here. So that would be toggling on and off. What else did we have? The search. Okay, there's a search bar, or I think I call it the go-to space as well. So, and I really like this one because essentially when you type in Control P, it allows you to search your current workspace for whatever file you're looking for. And I like it because it's actually very, very fast. Faster than
It's called the command. It's called the command palette. If anyone ever's trying to remember what it's called the command palette. And that's how you get it. The thing I took the longest to learn.
Thanks, Renee. So yes, so there's rather than only search for commands, you can also search for files. So the current instance is for searching for files. So if I want to look for, if I type in LDA, I know I have a file called LDA. So that's quite useful for me. But the other thing you can do also is you can type in quotation. So like as you would do with the Google search. So if you want the exact phrase, so if it's LDA with the quotation marks, it only brings the LDA files. And this is really useful because sometimes you're not sure where you are in your navigation system. So it's quite useful to have that. And with the commands as well, that's the command palette. It allows you to put in different commands. So highlight. Okay, that was Emmet, but Control-Shift-P allows you to put in commands. So if you want to add a cursor above, add a cursor below, various commands, you can access that through the command palette, which would be a Control-Shift-P. What else did I have? So that's the command palette. I like this one, and this is just copying path. And that's one of the benefits of having the file navigation system natively in the software, is you can copy the path from here. And so sometimes if you want to put it on the terminal, you can just copy path. And then if you're familiar with a bit of using the terminal, there's a CD command, which is allows you to navigate from one directory to another. So in that case, you can just type in CD and then paste the path, and it allows you to navigate to that particular path. So it's very useful in that sense, having the file navigation within the software. And that's one of the benefits I find, especially when I move through different files. That's just demonstrating the various files I have in there. What else did I have? Splitting text editor views. Another feature I really like as well. And so here I have you can have different open different files. I think I was trying to do 3. For example, you can set up that way. So you can have, I turned off the file navigation, and then I now have 3 text files. And so I can, okay, this is my own work, so that pardon the various content, it's more some of my own research. I was just demonstrating the how VS Code, how I use it. I can have the 3 windows there. You can have 4 or 5 even, depending on how much real estate you have on your screen. And if you want, you can also remove the terminal, toggle the terminal off, Control J, and that way you have just your various files. And you can use this view also to compare different files as well. So that's one of the handy features I really like as well. You can not only can you split the text windows, you can also split the terminal. So this way, I have 2 different terminal instances, and you can use them for different things. So sometimes, just to demonstrate, there's a command within Bash Linux called htop, which allows you just to see your various CPU usage. And so maybe you can leave that one on there, and then you use the other side to do something else. For example, this one is just demonstrating I was using it to open a particular piece of software. And so this is another, you can have 2 terminals, you can have 3 terminals even, as much as you want, and you can use them for different things. So that's just something I wanted to demonstrate that I use VS Code for. Another thing, just to move quickly, is a really awesome feature is the cursors. So if you want to make edits in multiple places, you can spawn multiple cursors. So in this case, I have 5 cursors, and I can edit those different lines at the same time. So for example, if I'm typing in this is the demo. I'm just typing the fact that I'm editing different lines, and it's quite useful sometimes if you want to put in the same content in different lines. But not only can you do that, you can also spawn like a giant cursor and just edit all the lines at one go. So for example, yeah, there we go. You can do that as well. And so I can edit all the different lines at once. I realized I didn't put the command on that on the slides, but it's just when you hold control and select at different points, it spawns a cursor. So that way you can spawn multiple cursors as well and just edit various lines at once. Yeah. So that's what I just wanted to show from that side of things. There's a link to more features from VS Code, which is just really scratching the surface. There's more which I keep on learning every day, and it just makes my workflow much more smoother. So something to explore with VS Code. How are you doing for time? It's 5 minutes. Okay. Renee, how much time do we have? Just to
we're half an hour in, so if
okay.
you have like 20-ish more minutes. Not that we don't have anyone currently asking any questions, but if you 20, maximum 30, obviously.
Okay. Okay.
More time.
Okay, thanks. Good to know. I'll just go through this and then we go through to the GitHub session. Just quickly introducing Python. As I introduced it earlier, quite a versatile language. And again, referencing Stack Overflow, you can see it's tied, well, not more or less tied between Python, JavaScript, and HTML, CSS as one of the most useful languages to learners take. And one of the things with Python as well, it's very versatile in the sense from a dev environment, but it's also used quite a lot in the science space. So for data science, people who go into math and ML, and also just for general visualization. So and that's one of the reasons I've come to use Python as well, because it's very integrated in very many software and very many tools that it just really is a great value add for us to learn. We won't cover much of it today. Renee has this pre-work cloud skills that can help build an understanding of Python, or Renee's code garden videos, which she does quite a bit of, and that could really help with understanding Python. And I think it will be very useful to have this understanding for the next session when Renee looks at building a web server, and it's not from scratch, but it's quite still useful to have an understanding of that.
Yes, that will be with Pamela Fox. But yeah, you won't have to write any Python from scratch. It will be in any modules we're using. Things like you might be doing it as a follow-up if we don't do it in the session. But to understand what you're creating and deploying, that'll be a great thing to invest some time learning.
Yep. Okay. Just a quick one on installing Python. You just want to check if you have Python installed. So some computers come with Python installed, as for example, Mac users have Python pre-installed, but on occasion you may find that it's Python 2. And so Python 3 is really recommended just because the syntax is updated and for compatibility purposes, it's recommended to install Python 3. To install Python, well, from a Windows side, if you want to check if you have Python, there's a Python -- version from a terminal side, and that will tell you whether you have Python or not. I think it also applies the same on Mac, I believe. And if you don't have it, you can download it either from the Python website. There's installation process of that, or for Windows users, you can get it from the MS Store, the Microsoft Store. So I think that's just the process of downloading Python. VS Code has a support for Python. There's an extension, which again, there's the features which we had natively, but then there's the Python extension adds more features that would be useful for just from a development perspective. So some of the features I noted was this addition of IntelliSense, which I think is like an autocomplete in terms of it understands Python syntax and what you're trying to do, and it can complete those for you. There's linting, and I think for me, which is one of the most important ones, as for my use case as well, is it allows you to use Jupyter notebooks and within VS Code as well. And so we'll look at the next slide. But generally, it's recommended to install the Python extension for that. Just quickly on Jupyter notebooks as well. Generally, we run when you run Python with a, you know what, I think it's easier to, I have a demonstration for this, just a very quick one. So this is just to show you the difference between the Jupyter notebook and running the Python file. If I can find it. If I had something. So this is just of my VS Code. This is what we're going to work with later. But this is it's a list.py. It's a very simple Python program. Essentially, it's a list, and so the list has these names, Christopher and Susan, and then there's a score variable which would keep various scores. So scores.append, it allows you to add to that list. So we add the score 98 and we add the score 99. Once you do that, you print the name and you then print the scores. So if I run this, so when you have installed the Python extension, one way to run is there's a way to run off the terminal, but you're just going to run based on the UI tool given. So when you press run Python file, you see that it prints, it has printed the name, Christopher and Susan, and it also printed the scores, which we've added is 98 and 99. So that's 98 and 99 there, and Christopher and Susan. This is a typical Python file, and so it runs it in its entirety. With the notebook, for example, it's the same piece of code, but it's interactive. So I can split, say, for example, if I take the same code and then I split the cell from there, so I can separate the two. And let's say I want to print scores actually from here. So these are two different cells and they run independently. So if I run this, oh, okay, well, I mean, I should print names because that's actually what is filled, not scores. So when you print name, it should print Christopher and Susan. So that way we've sort of split our code into various blocks. And in a similar manner, if I run print scores, you should be able to see that it does that as well. So compared to this, which I can actually do this, you can see that you can be able to split your code into small chunks. And so this is quite useful sometimes even from a debugging process, where you want to see when you have a large piece of code and we're not sure where the error is. Sometimes it's just easier to split that way. And then you can be able to narrow down to what could be the issue. So this is the benefit of the Jupyter notebooks. It's very useful from an education perspective, and also from a data science perspective as well, because it integrates. Because it uses Python, you can integrate various libraries onto the Jupyter notebook. So just a quick demonstration. This one, compare this is the .py file, and this is the Python notebook file, and just showing a bit of the functionality difference. Yep. So it's useful, especially from a learning point of view, because you can split your code that way, and so that's quite useful to have. So we'll just move on. Introducing Git and GitHub. And one thing I realized when it comes to introducing Git, it can be there's different layers of complexity in how you introduce it. I've certainly seen some introduce it in a very technical manner. I know Renee is going to cover Git later, and she's going to introduce it more formally. So for our case, we're introducing Git and GitHub for the purpose of integrating it with VS Code. And so what we can generally appreciate with Git is it's a distributed control system, versioning system that tracks changes in files. So when you set up Git, it allows you to just keep different versions of a file. and you can be able to retrieve those different versions if you want. So if you want to go back in time and retrieve a particular version, you can be able to do that within your local system. For example, you can set up Git to do that. GitHub allows you the same functionality, but from it's cloud hosted, and so you can be able to, from a code perspective, you can be able to keep history of building your code. So, example, you're collaborating with someone online, you're working on a particular code base. It can allow you to keep track of what is being added, what are the edits, and if you suppose want to go back in time, it gives you that functionality as well. I just wanted to, again, I really use this Stack Overflow survey was very interesting to me. So this was its use in terms of Git. Professional developers have 96.65% are using Git. Those who are learning to code, it's an 81% uptake in learning in using Git. And so they highlighted that about 70% don't use a versioning system. And so there is quite room for from a personal use case to learn how to use Git and see it's how it benefits your workflow. GitHub also has I had a line down GitHub. Generally, it's quite well used from a personal perspective and also professional perspective. There's other software that other people use, but Git is quite popular and the majority. There is again an extension of integrating VS Code to GitHub. Sorry, GitHub to VS Code. It's GitHub pull request. If you type in GitHub pull request and issues, you get this extension that you can install, and it gives you a lot of connects to your GitHub repository and allows you to work from natively from your VS Code installation. So one thing we're going to go through an exercise of forking and cloning our repository. To do that, to be able to go through this process smoothly, we do need to set up Git, and I can just show you. It's fairly simple. We just need to make sure we have our username and email. So if you have not downloaded Git, you can go ahead and download it from the software. So website, sorry. There's different OS depending on the OS you use. I just want to show quickly setting up Git. So once you install Git, this is assuming you install Git. So what it allows you to do, what you need to do is there's a command git config, and then with that you need to set up your username and email. So to set up your username, you just run the command git config username, and then you put your username. So for example, in my case, I put Victor Olet, and then you can put in your email as well, which I put mine there as well. So once you do that, you can verify that indeed you have done that by running email as well to verify that's correct. And once you do that, you've actually set up Git. So it's set a minimum you can for what to set it up. So once we set up Git on local machine, we can then go ahead and go through this exercise of forking and cloning a repo. So the idea of forking is copying in a layperson's terminology, is copying someone else's repository to your own GitHub account. And cloning is then copying that repository to your local machine. So forking is still within GitHub, so it's still on the internet. But cloning is if you want to bring it down to your local machine, work on it from your local machine. And we're gonna go ahead and do that, do a fork and then a clone. And after that, we'll make some changes on the Python file that we have, and then push that code back to GitHub. So this is the repository I have. It's a simple one. I just titled for this session so that it's minimal, doesn't have too many files. So we're gonna clone that, and then we're gonna fork and then clone that. So I will, again, another very quick demo. and have to skip through because it's fairly long. So this is the repository I just showed on the PowerPoint. I just made it for our use case. So over here, you can see there's a fork option. So it's not, this is not, well, it's mine, but it's not my GitHub, but this is just a dummy one I made. So the idea of forking is to copy this repository to my own personal GitHub repository. So you can just imagine this to be someone else's repository. And so you click on fork, and then you just need to set up, sorry, the quality is not the best. I can see it's a bit, not the best, but I think it's quite visible still. You just need to set up.
If you just increased your font size with Control Plus a bunch of times, that might help a bit. I know it's a recording. I'm so sorry. That's okay.
Yeah. But is it visible? Can it be seen?
It can mostly be seen. Like,
Oh, okay.
If you narrate, it'll all be okay.
Okay. Yeah. Feedback for next time. Yeah. So click fork, and then you just need to set up a repository name, but it just takes the default of what you had from the previous repo. So it's Python basics, just takes Python basics. You then just need to describe, which again also takes the description from the previous one. So if you're happy with the default, you can just leave that as is, and then you then everything else you leave as default, and then you just create fork. So once you do that, it forks the repository. It just takes a few seconds, and now you notice it's under my GitHub, which this is the one I use. This is my username, Hekimat1, and so it's the same repository, it's the same content, but now in my repository. So that's the idea of forking. And now I would like to clone this to my local VS Code instance. So to do that, the way I did it is I just copied this URL, and I went back to my VS Code. This is a new instance. So from here, there's a clone repository option, and you just select clone from GitHub, and then you just need to authenticate your the online GitHub to your VS Code, and that's what's happening now. It's authenticated. Yep. And so you need to select first. It should stop it here. And so once it's connected, it shows you all the repositories. And so starting with the most recent one. So I can see that this is the one that I just forked. So I'd select this one. And then I need a location. For me, just because it's a demo, I just selected the desktop. So this is where it will save my repository. Once I do that, it asks me whether I want to open it. Yes. Yeah, it's my own PC, it's my own repo, so I'm quite okay with that. And so once I do that, I have now cloned the content of that GitHub repository onto my local machine. And so what it contained was a list.py file. You've seen this file. It's the same file I used earlier, and a README. So what you're going to do is just make a small change.
We're losing your audio a bit, Victor. Maybe I'll get you to turn your camera off so you have enough bandwidth.
Demonstration purposes. Oh, yeah. Sure. How does it sound now?
That sounds great.
Okay, thanks for that. Wasn't aware. Yeah, so we're just gonna change the names, Christopher and Susan. Well, I mean, just for demonstration purposes, I put Victor and Renee, just to show, just to make some modification. Once we do that, you can immediately, there's a number that appears on the Git extension here telling you that there's been a modification. And we can go ahead and have a look at that modification. Speed up a bit. Yeah, this is a real one. So it tells me there's been a change in the list.py file. If I click it, it actually, as really good features, it shows you where the changes happened. So what it was before, which was Christopher and Susan, and now what's the modification, which is the change in name. And so this is a very useful way of tracking your changes. So this is just one change, but you can imagine sometimes you have multiple changes in different parts of your file. So it's quite useful to know what change you have made. And it can also, maybe if it wasn't an intentional change, you can rectify that. So I did want to make this change. So I'm quite okay with that. So I will go ahead and stage. So there's a commit button here. And before committing, you'd have to stage your changes, which is preparing to push it. So I will just, so once you're happy, you normally need to put when you're committing, and it's typically written in the imperative. So what I've done is, for example, I want to change participant name. That's the change I've made. And so this message is useful for you to know what you actually did earlier. So with that, I just go ahead and commit. It'll ask me to stage my changes, which is what is asking me now. I say yes, I do want to stage my changes. And then once I've done that, there's the option to sync my changes, so this local changes, back to my GitHub repository, which I wanted to do. So again, I just put the change participant name there, and then I would sync the changes. Once I do that, it's just a warning telling me that it will push the commit to my origin, my GitHub, which is what I want. So once I press OK, it's essentially done. And I can go, once I go to my, okay, maybe you may not be able to see that, but once I go to my, once I go to the URL, I can see that there's a change made a minute ago. And so this shows that there was a recent change. And once I open that file, I can see that indeed it's Victor and Renee. And so that shows that the change has been reflected on GitHub. And so that's just a very quick, this can actually be a very long process if you're doing it via command line. And so VS Code really allows you to really enhances workflow in that this process can be fairly simple all the way from forking to pushing your code to GitHub. So this is quite a useful workflow, which we encounter quite a lot when working with GitHub. And so the reason why I had to clone it is because I was working on my local repository. But if I'm working with the other ways of accessing VS Code, so if you can use VS the .dev. If you click, for example, if you press full stop or just change the .com to .dev, it'll open VS Code in this repository. And so once I fork, I can just work straight on the repository without having to clone it. And so that workflow becomes even more efficient. If all you want to do is just make that small change, you may not necessarily have to work on your local machine. You can do it via the new ways, the more recent ways of accessing VS Code. So just wanted to show that. Yep. So this just walks through what I've done, and you should ultimately be able to see the change on your GitHub. So how much time do we have, Renee? Just to check.
So it's 10 minutes before the end of the session, or about 9 minutes. So you can use that because we don't have any question askers at this time. Yeah, but then we have to end at 11 here. So that's your 8 a.m.
Yep. Okay. Well, that generally concludes. I don't have a slide that shows that, but generally that concludes what we are trying to look at. So if I go to this part, I've sort of introduced working with VS Code, some light Python programming using VS Code, and then integrating VS Code with GitHub. And we've been able to fork our repository, clone it, make some changes on some Python code, and then push that on GitHub. The other thing is a little bit of an extra, although I don't have a working demo, but I can introduce it to you. Is live share. Just give me a second. Okay, live share, which is a way of working collaboratively, which is also fairly useful especially for those who are sort of learning how to code as well. And it's a tool that just allows for pair programming. So essentially, you can be able to code along with someone. So through the live share extension, which I think that, yeah, this is a screenshot of it. Through the live share extension, you can be able to generate a link, which you can then share with someone, and the person who has that link can then be able to access your you can be able to access the code you're doing, you're having. So and they can be able to also key in and contribute to that code. So that way you can work together collaboratively on coding. And so this is useful. So for example, if you're fairly new to, you get up to speed with programming, or get up to speed generally with a particular code base, maybe someone more experienced can you can be able to work with them on VS Code and on that particular programming on that particular code. And so it's really a useful feature that has been added on VS Code. It's not that recent, but quite useful. And so I just thought I would introduce it to you. It's something to keep in mind. One of the many things that VS Code has that can really enhance your programming learning journey, and from a career context, professional context as well. So I just wanted to highlight that, and there's a link to more information on LiveShare. And with that, that is really what I wanted to share. So hope it's been useful. And if there is any questions, I'd be happy to take them. But that really concludes the end of what I wanted to share.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Victor. There was so much information there, like all the hottest tips for VS Code. I think that was, yeah, it's perfect. Look, it's a nice refresher for me, on some of the, control, like the keyboard shortcuts. I'm like, yes, that is how I can get the terminal. I've forgotten that. So that's really, really helpful. And I think a great starter for anyone who's just like, how do I use my tools most efficiently? So thank you so much for coming and delivering this for us today. Sarah, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, thank you, Victor. I'm just going to turn my camera on now just before we finish the recording. So just a reminder, who has joined us on the on-demand version today, just check out the LinkedIn group for any updates for what's coming up next, and just make sure you can register through there for any upcoming sessions which you've missed in the cohort. And that is about it. So we'll end it there for today. Thank you so much, Victor and Renee, for helping present as well. Yeah, and thanks to everybody for tuning in. Have a good one. Bye.
Bye.
Gonna stop the recording.
Thank you.
Thanks.